Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Miles, better known these days as Boulevard, and before I was an LOR caster, I was the 2016 Force of Will World Champion. And yes, the rumors are true, I am a World Champion, and it was for this game that you've probably never heard of. And something that I always wanted to do was build a max rarity version of the deck that I won the World Championship with. And, when we crowned our first LOR World Champion on September 18th, that was also the 5-year anniversary of my own World Championship win, so that was a really fun, little nostalgia run for me. And you might be wondering, hey, Boulevard, how in the hell did it take you 5 years to build a max rarity version of this deck? And the answer is if you want to build a Force of Will deck, especially one that's not standard legal, yeah, it's relatively cheap. But if you want to max rarity it, things get a little bit pricier, and it was just like this expense that I could never really justify until recently. And so I want to give you guys some context into what kind of player I am, show off the deck a little bit, and I know that what you're thinking, right? I've never heard of Force of Will, how am I going to understand any of this? Luckily, Force of Will and Magic the Gathering are extremely similar games, so I have a 3-minute primer to kind of run you through the differences between Force of Will and Magic the Gathering. So if you understand Magic, you should be able to understand Force of Will, at least enough to understand this deck profile. And if you don't understand Magic the Gathering, you are watching my content. You play card games. You know someone that plays Magic the Gathering. It's like the universal card game language. If you play card games, you have a friend that played Magic and can understand this for you. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to run through my deck that I won Worlds with 5 years ago. But before that, how to understand Force of Will if you understand Magic the Gathering. You sit down to play a game of Standard, but if we're talking power level, you sit down to play a game of Legacy, because this is Force of Will. You get it. The first thing we want to do is take the lands out of your deck because those don't belong there, and then set them in their own pile off to the side. Now that your deck is something like 38 cards, we're just going to round that up to 40, but you can still play up to 60 if you want. Then we're going to take your land pile and cut that down to 10, though you can play up to 20. Then we're going to give you a commander. It's called a ruler. Its color identity doesn't mean anything. You can play whatever colors you like. The front side is called the ruler side, and all the text on that card applies while it's in your command zone. Judgment is the cost to put it into the battlefield as a creature. When you do that, you flip it over, and now it has creature stats and new text. Once your ruler is killed, you can't cast it again unless it has a special keyword, and it goes back to its front side in the command zone when it dies. Energize is essentially the coin from Hearthstone. If you are going second, your ruler gets an Energize token, which you can remove at any time to create a mana of that color. Now that the deck is set up, let's start a game. First, you want to take the Magic the Gathering color pie and take the counterspells out of blue and put them in green, and then pretty much leave everything else alone. Now that there are no lands in your deck, we're only going to draw 5 cards instead of 7, and you have a maximum hand size of 6. For mulligans, you're going to do what's called a partial Paris mulligan, where you take any number of cards from your opening hand and put them on the bottom of your deck, and then draw that many cards. For phases, we don't do untap, upkeep, draw. We're going to leave that in the 1990s. We do draw, untap, with a priority sequence in the untap step before and after your lands untap. You may think this sounds really broken, and you would be correct. A simple explanation is, say you had a creature with fire breathing. You can now use all of your unspent mana, pumping it up during your untap step, and then still have it be your turn so it gets to maintain those stats. And that is just one of many practical applications. Also, Summoning Sickness goes away at the end of the turn the creature was played, so if you play something with a tap ability on your turn, you can use its effect on your opponent's turn. Another big difference is how combat works. Your turn moves fluidly between the main phase and combat phases, sort of like Hearthstone. So you can attack with a creature, and play a card, and then attack with another creature. Also, blocking requires you to tap. There is no double blocking, there is also no ghost blocking. If you attack and something blocks and you remove it, you hit your target. And I say target and not your opponent's life total because you can also attack tapped creatures, though there are creatures that have a keyword that allows them to attack untapped creatures. So how do you get lands? Well, that's where your ruler comes in. At sorcery speed, once per turn, you can tap your ruler to put the top card of your land deck, or stones as they're called in Force of Will, into play. This is called calling a stone. You cannot do Judgment if your ruler is tapped, so calling a stone and flipping your ruler to its creature side is a decision that you make on nearly every turn of the game. Your flipped ruler, or J-ruler as it's called, shorthand for Judgmented Ruler, can still call stones once it's in play, but not in the same turn that you flipped it, even if it has haste. Now that your J-ruler is in play, each turn you make decisions on whether you want to continue to call stones, make an attack with it, or leave it untapped so that it cannot be the target of attacks, but still make use of its J-ruler side text. Also, J-rulers are notably different from creatures, or resonators as they're called. You cannot counter a J-ruler, as it is not a spell, and things that target resonators do not work on J-rulers unless the card specifically says J/Resonator. You also have 4,000 starting life instead of 20, so the stats have been adjusted accordingly. Cut anything in half to get an approximate of how strong it would be in Magic the Gathering, though odd amounts of attack, health, and damage do make things a little bit less clear sometimes. The format we played was block constructed, with the first set of the new block. I don't know if Magic the Gathering still has the block system like they used to, so I'll explain, but it should sound pretty familiar. 4 sets make up a block, and 2 blocks are in standard at each time. The game only had 2 blocks up until this point, Grim and Alice, and Worlds was to be played with the first set of the new block, Lapis. The set itself contained 5 rulers, 1 for each color, and 5 structure decks were coming out alongside the set, each with another unique ruler, bringing us to 10 rulers to pick from, 2 for each color. On top of this, because the Grim block was set to rotate with this new one, true dual lands were being reprinted as well. So despite it being block constructed, we had a pretty deep format with a lot of choices to make. Now it's time to introduce the format warping card, Captain Hook the Pirate. I couldn't find anything close to this as a Magic the Gathering equivalent, but he is a 5 mana 1000/1000 who bounces 2 lands or 2 creatures. Despite dual lands being reprinted, you now had to carefully consider how greedy your mana base could be, as we also only had 1 counterspell, Twofold Chant, which acted as a force spike sometimes and a counterspell at others. Now I want to very briefly introduce the meta staples that everyone was expecting. First up, we have Feetsing Green-Blue X Ramp, the mid-range deck of the format, and expectedly the best one. There were a number of ramp cards in the set, and with Captain Hook being the defining card, playing it as early as turn 3 seemed very broken. The main question to answer was how many and which colors to play, as the only mandatory cards were green and blue. Then we have Mikage, the control deck of the format, usually played as Jund or Black-White. The ping ability may not seem like much, but remember, you draw and then untap in Force of Will, meaning you could stack up some serious damage in one turn. Mikage was also the win condition, utilizing the counters racked up by pings on an Umezawa's Jite-style J-ruler with flying and imperishable, which is the keyword I alluded to earlier that allows you to reflip your ruler as many times as you like at no additional cost. Then we have Mono White Fairy Tales, the aggro deck of the format. You were immune to Captain Hook because your best 1-drop wanted you to play basic lands anyway, and you had finishing power with your overstatted and undercosted J-ruler, who took all keywords away from your opponent's creatures while you had ways to give it flying. And rounding things out, we had Mercurius, the combo deck of the format. She starts the game with 2 mana counters on her that can be spent as blue mana to play ancient magic spells, and she gets an additional 5 when she flips, and another 5 if you remove her little dragon when you flip her, giving her 12 total. Your goal is to play an Awakened or Kicked, Rising from the Depths, bouncing all creatures and putting 3 water creatures from your hand into play, ideally Captain Hooks and Ice Dragons of Altea. I'm the kind of player who just plays what's broken, so I landed on green-blue-red ramp. However, in testing, we quickly realized that we didn't care much for the tokens that were generated by Feetsing, as the Go-Wide Elf Ball Dream rarely happened. Instead, we moved her to the side deck and played Determined Girl Charlotte. Her ruler side let us pay a blue mana and discard a card to tap a creature. When she flipped for 2 mana, mind you, whereas Feetsing was 5, you drew until you had 5 cards in hand. You also gained 100 life for each card you drew while she was on the field, she could not be attacked, and you could pay blue and 1 to discard a card and bounce a creature, allowing us to replay our own bombs. Feetsing did still have her uses, and in fact one of our teammates actually did decide to main deck Feetsing and side deck the Charlotte, citing that Feetsing was better against the general field, while Charlotte was better in the mirror. Across the 7 rounds of Swiss and the top 8, top 4, and finals, I played 8 mirror matches, so going Charlotte really worked out for me. Now, we ended up playing 11 lands for reasons that I don't fully remember. Again, you have a land deck and then you get 1 per turn. There was some kind of math involved, something to do with hitting green turn 1 X% of the time. But essentially what you're looking at here is 1 island, 2 forest, 4 volcanic island, and 4 tropical island. And that was the mana base. I just wanted to give you a context of the mana base before I kind of dove into the deck. The first thing I wanted to touch on is the ramp package that we got to play. So up here at the top, we have 4 copies of Magic Stone Analysis, which is basically Search for Tomorrow. Again, we only played 3 basic lands, 2 forest, and an island. We wanted to play the island so that we could search it up because Captain Hook cost 2 blue mana, and we didn't want to be at the mercy of just organically hitting 2 tropical islands in order to cast it. So we wanted that in there. And then as you can see, obviously we have 4 copies of the card and only 3 basic lands. That's where Charlotte comes in big, being able to discard the extra copies that we no longer need in order to trade them out for other cards later on when we flip her and draw to 5. Down at the bottom, we have 4 copies of Sacred Elf, which is basically just Elvish Mystic. And then in the middle, we have Sorceress of Heavenly Wind Melfi, which is Birds of Paradise on crack. Not only is she a 2-mana 3/6, again, cut those in half for 4,000 life, 5-color mana dork, but she has Flash instead of Flying. And she has another ability where if you have played 2 or more cards this turn, then prevent all damage that would be dealt by target J Resonator. Now, due to a mistranslation at the World Championship, she was played as prevent all damage that would be dealt to target J Resonator, so not as good against some of the things in the format, some of the threats, but still performed admirably, mostly in there because it is a 5-color mana dork with Flash. And again, Summoning Sickness goes away at the end of the turn, so we can flash this in on our opponent's end phase and use it for mana on our turn. Then we had 4 copies of Vampire Hunter Christie. Couldn't really find an equivalent of this in Magic, but essentially, if you've played 2 or more cards in a turn, again, that's kind of a theme of the set, then you get to fight a creature. And if your ruler is Feetsing, then you can pay a green mana to pump her by +2/+2, which, again, another reason to play Feetsing, one of those good ways to take advantage of the draw untap mechanic that does exist in Force Will. So you could use all your unspent mana, pumping her into Oblivion, and then untap all your lands again. And another reason that we cited Feetsing was to take advantage of that ability in certain matchups. This is kind of what set our deck apart from a lot of the other field. A lot of the players were only playing 2 copies of this card, but we found ourselves really wanting a 4-drop to round out the curve, and it also allowed us to play more of those cheap spells that people were really just playing to turn on the cards that needed you to play 2 cards in a turn in order to get their ability on. So another thing that you could do, because these abilities go on the stack whether you've played 2 cards or not, is you could summon a Christie, she resolves, her ability goes on the stack, right? So it checks to see if we have played 2 cards in a turn. If we haven't, it fizzles. If we do, it goes off. In response to that ability, we play Melfi. Melfi then triggers, oh look, we've played 2 cards in a turn. Christie takes no damage this turn. Now Christie's ability triggers, and we fight your creature. And that was a pretty common play that we used to not only clear out threats, but even just control our opponent's mana dorks, because again, the ramp deck was very popular at this event. Before I get into all the cards that we played that were super cheap, really just to allow you to get easy access to those, oh, I've played 2 cards this turn, we have Twofold Chant, the counter spell that I alluded to earlier. If you just play it naked, it is a Force Spike. If you have played 2 cards in the turn, then it is a counter spell, meaning that we really needed to load up on 1-mana ways to activate these things. One such cheap card was Tama, Familiar of Holy Wind, the card that spoiled 1-drops for me. Tama says, enter the battlefield, draw a card. That's what I want my 1-drops to do. You can also sacrifice her to deal 200 damage to something, which is really relevant because there was no singular card that was going to kill Melfi, but cards in conjunction with Tama could take out Melfi, again, controlling your opponent's mana, very important for those ramp mirrors. But yeah, this card just kind of set the bar for 1-drops for me, and this is why I hate all 1-drops now. Then we needed cheap spells to turn on these cards at a whim, especially our Twofold Chants. So Whisper from the Wind was also, again, pseudo a ramp card because of the draw untap mechanic. You reveal the top card of your deck, draw it, and then all cards with that revealed name cost green less until the end of the turn. So something that you could do is, you know, before your untaps, you play this, you reveal the top card of your deck. Oh, look, it's a Tama. Tama goes to my hand. Now I untap for the turn. My Tama costs 0 mana. Look, ramping. Obviously this applied to Christie as well, but again, it only costs green less, not 1 less, so it only applied to our green cards, but most of the deck was green, so it worked out pretty well. Then we have Lightning Strike. This is the card that I chose to get made in my likeness for winning the World Championship. As you can see, they did a phenomenal job, and this is just Lightning Bolt. And then up here at the top, we have Charlotte's Water Transformation Magic, which is what the runner-up Quinn Koteki chose to get his face on, so it's nice that I have both of our cards in the deck. And it's essentially just Turn to Frog with Remnant for 1 mana. Turns it into a 4/4 bear with no abilities, and you can play it from the graveyard, and then it exiles itself. Again, another card that's really good with Christie. You know, you play it, you fight something, oh, it's too big, yeah, let's turn it into a 4/4 bear. This card is another thing that was like kind of slept on, kind of not. Most people played 2 copies. When we loaded up on how many Christies we did, we decided we wanted 3, and it worked out beautifully. And then Lightning Strike we played not only because it was a nice, you know, 1-mana spell to activate all these different engines that we had, but because it killed Sacred Elf, and this plus Tama killed Melfi. And again, there were not a lot of ways in the format to kill Melfi, plus Bear Magic plus Lightning Strike just kills any creature. Bear Magic couldn't hit J-Rulers, is important to note. It wasn't that broken, but it will hit Resonators. And then, of course, we rounded out with the things that we were ramping into: 4 copies of Captain Hook the Pirate, bounce 2 non-basic lands or 2 creatures, and 3 copies of Fiery Chariot Red Boy, which is Radiant Flames on a body. Again, we have Birds of Paradise in the deck and a 3-color land base. We can get this up to the full 1,000 damage that it could deal instead of just its base 500. And one thing that I did want to mention about Captain Hook is, again, because it is bouncing lands back into a deck rather than a hand. If, for example, these are your 2 lands and I want to lock you off of red, I can put the red on top and then put the blue on top of that and make sure that you are locked out of lands or locked out of colors in that way, which is another reason that the 3-color or even 4 and 5-color land bases, as some of the players ended up going for, was so risky. And then Red Boy was really just there not only as a creature that is entirely too large to answer, but it did a very good job of swinging matchups if you could wipe out 1 or 2 mana dorks from your opponent because you just happened to hit a bunch of ramp early. It also hit J-Rulers, so you could clean up a few things in that way, and this has really helped clean up the Featsing matchup. Because Featsing was so much mana, you just make sure that you drop Red Boy on the following turn, and all of a sudden that Elf Ball strategy is just out the window. And it's another big reason we decided not to play Featsing, was because Red Boy was just so impactful. But yeah, that is the main deck that I played, red, blue, green ramp into these guys. So, because I gave context to the format, and because I'm celebrating the fact that I blinged out this deck, I did also bling out the side deck, so I'm going to go over that very briefly. Again, throughout the 10 rounds of play, 7 for Swiss and the Top Cut, round 1 I played Mars, which is an aggro deck that I didn't even mention. I played 1 Mercurius, and then I played 8 Charlotte, Featsing, Ramp, Mirrors. So I really didn't get to utilize too much of my side deck, but we did still put a lot of thought into it. For starters, I still side decked Featsing, along with 3 copies of Secluded Village Amonsville, which is basically Spider Silk Armor, except the health buff only goes on to elves, and this was for that Fairy Tale aggro deck I had mentioned earlier, where it takes flying away from everything and can give itself flying. So getting reach was very important because it wasn't actually a keyword, so 0 could not remove it from your creatures. Never played that matchup, never got to side any of that. We sided 1 Mountain, because, again, for the Fairy Tale deck, we wanted to be able to get very quick access to our Lightning Bolt so that we could kill the creatures and not take as much damage, but we didn't feel like we needed that in the main. It was really just that one matchup where we would take out the island for the Mountain. 1 Ancient Knowledge. This is something that a few players ended up main decking in their ramp decks. You just look at your top 5 cards, put 2 in your hand, and then put the rest on the bottom in a random order, any order, I don't remember. One thing that I didn't actually get to mention earlier is that while we do the partial Paris Mulligan, right, so you put all your cards on the bottom, there was no way to shuffle our deck. So anything that we mulliganed, we knew we were never going to see again. And it's sort of the similar thing with Ancient Knowledge. Whatever order you put them on the bottom didn't really matter. I don't think we ever really got close to playing for deck out, but it was just like a card advantage engine that we sided in the mirror to try and keep up. 2 additional copies of Twofold Chant. Again, not super useful against a lot of the field. We sided in a 3rd copy for the mirror, and then we put in a 4th copy if we were playing against Mercurius, because they do just have that 11 mana spell that we're looking to cancel. 2 Great Holy Sealing Wave. This is almost like Fatal Push, but saying that is disingenuous. So 2 mana, sorcery, bottom deck a 2-drop or lower. If you've played 2 cards in the turn, bottom deck a 4-drop or lower. It was just a little bit of removal for things that weren't super easy to handle. I don't remember the exact reason that we side decked them. It's been so long. Friendly Vampire Aria. This came in against Mikage and 0 because when we side into Featsing, we want to turn on that Elf Ball Go Wide strategy, and she gives other Wind J Resonators +2/+2, so all our elves become 3/3s instead of 1/1s, which is obviously pretty good for going wide. And she also has Barrier Black, which means she cannot be targeted by black spells or abilities, so she herself is immune to Mikage Sojiro, so it did a little bit of lifting in that matchup, but again, never played that one. And then 4 copies of Shackles in Ice. This is the card that Mikage needed to be able to remove in the main deck. While it is basically it's an equipment, right? And equipments work like they do in Magic, where the bestow cost is the cost to equip them. So while it is unequipped, you cannot activate ruler abilities. So Mikage basically shut down, wasn't able to rack up his counters, or utilize the cards in his deck that relied on him pinging things, and then you could attach it to a creature, and that creature could not use its activate abilities. So some players main decked it, and they were like, hey, if I'm not playing the Mikage matchup, I'll throw this on a mana dork to turn it off. But yeah, that is my deck. So that's how I won a world championship. And through my time in Force of Will, I wasn't just a world champion. I ended up winning 7 premier events throughout my 4 years of competing, 5 years of competing. 4 Grand Prix, 1 World Championship, 1 National Championship, and 1 thing called Force of Will, the Masters Invitational. And of the 7 decks that I've won events with, I actually have 5 of them now completed. I decided to kind of get it all out in one go. So if there's any kind of interest in this kind of thing, yeah, I would love to show you guys the other decks that I won with in order to get, just continue to give you guys some insight into the kind of player that I am, what I used to do when I was competing in card games instead of casting. So yeah, I really hope that you guys enjoyed this. I don't know when the next one will come out. This is wasn't going to be like a regular rapid fire thing. But now that I have the Force of Will and MTG primer kind of pre-shot, I can just throw that at the start of the videos. That thing took like an entire day to put together. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this, and look forward to a few more of these in the future.